Aquarius. If you've ever been told you're too much, too emotional, too intense, too deep, this message is not here to fix you. It's here to tell you something most people never realize. Nothing was wrong with your heart. You weren't overwhelming. You weren't asking for too much. You were loving someone who didn't have the emotional capacity to meet you where you stood. And when that truth finally lands not in your mind, but in your body, something inside you loosens. If this already feels personal, type "I receive" in the comments and let yourself be seen here. Because what I'm about to share next is not just about love, it's about why your soul chose this lesson and what changes when you stop shrinking for the wrong connection. Aquarius, stay here with me for a moment. Don't rush this part. After that quiet exhale you just felt, there's often a soft confusion that follows. Not panic. Not sadness. Just a strange stillness, like standing at the edge of water at night, unsure whether to step forward or turn back. You see, when you've spent so long being the one who understands, the one who adapts, the one who feels first and fixes later, silence can feel unfamiliar, almost suspicious. And yet there is something sacred about this pause. Because beneath the roles you've played, beneath the patience you learned too early, there has always been a quieter truth living inside you. One that never demanded explanation. One that never needed permission. Aquarius, you've always had this way of loving from the inside out. Not loudly, not dramatically, but thoroughly. You love with awareness. You love with context. You love with memory. And somewhere along the way, that depth began to feel heavy. Not because it was wrong, but because it wasn't met. So you learned to carry it wasn't met. So you left, you were independent. You told yourself you didn't need much. You told yourself that being strong meant staying quiet when something inside you wanted to be held. There's no shame in that. It makes sense. Especially for you. Aquarius energy is always watching the horizon, always sensing what could be next, always translating the emotional weather before others even notice the shift. But when you're the only one paying attention, even the clearest sky can start to feel isolating. Have you noticed how often you knew something was off long before it had a name? How your body reacted before your mind caught up? How you stayed anyway, hoping clarity would eventually soften the ache? That wasn't you being naive. That was you believing in growth. In time. In the idea that love, if given enough patience, would learn how to speak your language. But here's what rarely gets said out loud. Not every soul is fluent in emotional depth. Some people care deeply and still lack the capacity to show up fully. Some hearts feel genuine affection and still don't know how to hold another without retreating. And when you love someone like that, the confusion doesn't come from them alone. It comes from the gap. The space between what you feel and what's actually possible. That gap can make you question your instincts. It can make you negotiate with your own needs. It can make you wonder if wanting steadiness means you're somehow asking for too much. But what if it never did? What if this moment right now isn't about loss at all, but about recalibration? Because something subtle is happening within you. You may not be able to name it yet, but there's a shift in how you listen to yourself. A gentler loyalty forming. A quieter boundary. You're no longer trying to prove how deeply you can love. You're beginning to ask how love feels in your body when it's mutual. And that question changes everything. As you stay with me, I want you to notice what rises when you imagine love without effort. Without explanation. Without the need to manage someone else's emotional world. Does it feel unfamiliar? Or does it feel like remembering something you once forgot? Because what unfolds next in this story is not about becoming someone new. It's about returning to the part of you that never stopped knowing. And that's where the light begins to shift. Aquarius, there's something I want to say to you softly, because it's easy to miss if spoken too loud. The way you move through the world has never been accidental. There's an inner tuning fork inside you, always vibrating just slightly ahead of the moment. Not in a dramatic way. In a perceptive way. Like you're listening for signals most people don't know exist. Your mind has always leaned forward, toward ideas, possibilities, futures not yet formed. But your heart has carried the weight of many seasons. It remembers emotional patterns. It recognizes familiar silences. It senses shifts before words arrive. That combination, future mind, ancient heart, is rare. And rare things often feel out of place before they're understood. When you were younger, you probably noticed more than you could explain. Tension in a room. Unspoken disappointment. The emotional temperature beneath polite conversation. You felt it in your chest, in your breath, sometimes in the way your body tensed without warning. And because others didn't always see what you saw, it was easier for them to name you than to understand you. Too sensitive. Too observant. Too intense for something so small. So you adapted. Not by hardening, but by learning restraint. You studied yourself. You learned when to speak and when to stay quiet. You learned how to regulate your emotions internally so you wouldn't overwhelm the space around you. That wasn't emotional distance. That was emotional intelligence forming in solitude. What many people never realize is that Aquarians don't lack feeling. You filter it, you process it, you hold it long enough to make sense of it before offering it to the world. But carrying empathy like that as a second nervous system has a cost. You become a steady one. The one people lean on without noticing how rarely you lean back. And somewhere in that pattern, you may have started to believe that needing care would make you a burden. That asking for emotional reciprocity meant asking for too much. Here's the truth I want you to sit with for a moment. Your sensitivity was never a flaw in a shallow world. It was information, it was awareness. It was an early warning system designed to protect your spirit. But protection can turn into isolation when you're always the one adjusting. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to be with someone who senses you before you have to explain yourself? Someone who meets your awareness instead of benefiting from it? This isn't about blame. It's about alignment. Because your soul doesn't crave intensity. It craves resonance. A feeling that the emotional depth you bring has somewhere safe to land. Right now, there's a subtle recalibration happening inside you. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just a quiet shift in how much you're willing to hold alone. You're beginning to notice which connections feel expansive and which ones quietly drain your light. You're noticing how your body responds when empathy is mutual versus when it's extracted. That awareness, that gentle clarity is not closing your heart. It's teaching it discernment. And as this story continues to unfold, what you're stepping into is not a world that suddenly becomes deeper, but a version of yourself who no longer apologizes for depth at all. Stay with me. There's more unfolding beneath the surface than you might expect. Aquarius, as you sit with that quiet awareness, something else begins to surface. Not as a sharp memory, but as a familiar ache that once lived in the background of your days. There was someone who mattered more than you ever planned for. Not a whirlwind. Not a fantasy. Just a connection that slowly wove itself into your life until it felt significant. In the beginning, it didn't hurt. There were moments that felt sincere. Shared laughter. Small hopes exchanged in soft tones. Enough warmth to make you believe this could grow into something steady. And that belief that gentle optimism is something you rarely give lightly. But even in the good moments, there was a subtle imbalance you couldn't quite name. A quiet loneliness that didn't come from being alone but from being unseen. You found yourself explaining not in frustration but in hope, trying different words, different tones, different timing, as if clarity would eventually unlock safety. You waited, not passively, patiently, trusting that emotional presence would arrive with time. And when it didn't, you didn't accuse, you adjusted. You told yourself stories that softened the edges. They're tired. They've been through a lot. They show love differently. You translated their distance into reason instead of listening to your own discomfort. That wasn't denial. That was compassion working overtime. Aquarius, this is where I want to be very clear with you. You didn't lose yourself in that connection. You invested yourself. An investment always carries risk when depth is met with limitation. You weren't weak for staying. You were loyal to the version of love you believe in. A love that grows. A love that learns. A love that becomes more than it starts as. But slowly, something shifted inside you. You noticed how often you were the one holding emotional space. How your questions went unanswered. How your vulnerability was acknowledged but not fully met. You became the steady presence. The emotional translator. The one who smoothed over silence so the connection could survive another day. And somewhere in that process, a quiet doubt began to form. Maybe I'm too much. Maybe my needs are unrealistic. Maybe this is just how love feels. That question, that small erosion of self-trust, was the most painful part. Not the distance, not the inconsistency, but the moment you turned inward and wondered if your heart was the problem. What if I told you that doubt wasn't born from your sensitivity, but from the absence of reciprocity? That when love requires you to constantly reinterpret your worth, it begins to cost more than it gives. This isn't about blaming them. They may have cared in the only way they knew how. But caring and capacity are not the same thing. And your soul, with all its awareness and quiet intelligence, felt that difference long before your mind accepted it. Have you noticed how your body reacted back then? The tension you ignored, the fatigue you normalized, the way relief only came when you were alone again. That was information. Gentle, persistent, asking to be honored. You're not revisiting this memory now to reopen wounds. You're revisiting it because your nervous system is ready to release the story that you were ever asking for too much. As this unfolds, something even more important is waiting to be seen. Not what went wrong, but what your heart has been quietly preparing you for all along. Stay here with me. The meaning of that connection is about to change. Aquarius, after sitting with that memory, there's a softer truth that begins to reveal itself. Not loud, not dramatic, just quietly honest. You didn't remain there because you forgot your value. If anything, you stayed because you saw value everywhere. In people, in process, in what could still become whole with time. You have always understood something many don't, that people are unfinished stories. That growth rarely arrives fully formed. That love, real love, is often awkward before it is fluent. So when you notice their rough edges, their emotional pauses, their inability to meet you where you stood, you didn't walk away. You leaned in with patience. You told yourself this was part of the journey. That connection deepens through effort. That staying is sometimes an act of faith, not fear. And that belief didn't come from weakness. It came from wisdom earned early in life. From learning that bonds matter. From knowing that abandonment leaves echoes. You didn't want to be another wound in someone else's story. You didn't want to give up on a connection that still carried warmth in certain moments. So you stayed present, attentive, hopeful. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted in the balance. Conversations began to feel heavier, not because of conflict, but because of responsibility. You became the place emotions landed without ever being invited to land yourself. You listened deeply. You absorbed tension. You held silence so it wouldn't become distance. You regulated the room without ever calling it work. That's the part few people see. How emotional intelligence can quietly turn into labor when it flows in only one direction. You weren't keeping score. That's not how you love. But your nervous system was keeping track even when your mind refused to. There were days you felt tired without knowing why. Moments when being alone felt like relief instead of loneliness. Times when your body relaxed only after the effort stopped. And still, you question yourself before questioning the dynamic. Maybe I need less. Maybe I'm misreading this. Maybe my standards are unrealistic. That question didn't come from entitlement. It came from empathy stretched too thin. Here's something rarely said out loud. Aquarius energy is future-facing, but it is also deeply relational. You don't bond lightly. When you attach with intention. And when you care with continuity. So when a connection begins to cost you more than it nourishes you, you don't leave abruptly. You try to repair it from the inside. But love is not meant to feel like a role you must perform. It isn't meant to require constant translation of your needs. It isn't meant to ask you to become smaller so the bond can remain intact. You didn't stay too long because you didn't know better. You stayed because your heart was generous and your hope was sincere. And now, looking back, you may feel tenderness for that version of yourself. The one who tried so hard to make something work without ever betraying their values. Can you offer that version compassion instead of critique? Because that wasn't a mistake. It was a lesson in discernment. One that only arrives when you are ready to understand the difference between commitment and self-abandonment. As this realization settles, another awareness is quietly approaching. One that will change how you recognize love when it appears again. And that shift is closer than you think. Aquarius, let this land softly now. Not as a realization you need to analyze, but as something your chest recognizes before your mind catches up. There is a truth that changes the way the past feels in your body. Not heavier, clearer. It begins with understanding that care and availability are not the same language. Someone can feel affection for you, genuine affection, and still be unable to stay present when it matters most. They can admire your mind, be drawn to your spirit, even say the right things at the right moments, and yet disappear emotionally when depth is required. That contradiction is confusing, especially for someone like you who assumes love naturally expands to meet what it touches. But some people love from the edges of themselves. Not because they are cruel, not because they intend harm, but because they have never learned how to remain open when intimacy asks something of them. Your depth didn't overwhelm them. It revealed the places they had been avoiding, the unspoken fears, the emotional skills never developed, the inner work postponed for another day. And instead of meeting you there, instead of growing into the moment, their nervous system chose protection. So they pulled back. They minimized. They distracted. They asked for space in subtle ways, not always with words but with absence. And because you are perceptive, you felt that shift immediately. You sensed the closing long before it was acknowledged. Here is where the story often turns inward. You wondered if your honesty came too fast, if your questions went too deep, if your need for emotional clarity was somehow unreasonable. But what was actually happening had very little to do with you. Your presence illuminated what they had not healed. Your consistency highlighted their inconsistency. Your emotional fluency mirrored their avoidance. That mirror can feel threatening to someone who survives by staying unexamined. So without meaning to, they asked you to soften, to wait longer, to need less, to become more manageable, not through commands, but through silence, through hesitation, through patterns that subtly trained you to second-guess yourself. And because you are adaptive, because you value connection, you tried to adjust. But here is the truth that frees you. Love is not meant to require self-reduction. It is not meant to be sustained by your flexibility alone. It does not ask you to dim so someone else can remain comfortable. Real connection expands both people, even when it is uncomfortable. Especially then, the moment you stop personalizing another person's limitations, something profound happens. The shame dissolves, the confusion quiets, and your self-trust begins to return. You realize you are not rejected. You are unmatched. There is a difference. One wounds the ego, the other clarifies the path. Have you noticed how your body responds to this distinction? The way your shoulders drop slightly, the way your breath deepens, the way the story feels less heavy when it no longer ends with you being at fault. This is not about rewriting the past. It is about releasing the false conclusion it left behind. Your depth is not a liability. It is a signal, one that calls in those who are capable of meeting you without asking you to disappear. And now that you can see this clearly, you are no longer negotiating your worth. You are choosing alignment. Stay with me here. Because once this truth settles, your idea of love begins to shift in a way that feels unfamiliar at first, but deeply relieving. What comes next is quieter than what you've known. And that quiet is where healing starts. Aquarius, now notice how the air around this story begins to change. Not with fireworks, not with intensity, but with a quiet sense of relief you may not have words for yet. There is another way love can feel. And the most surprising part is how unremarkable it seems at first. Healthy love does not announce itself with urgency. It doesn't pull at your nervous system. It doesn't require you to stay alert, to read between lines, to anticipate shifts in tone or distance. Instead, it arrives softly, almost unnoticed. Like a room you walk into and only later realize your shoulders have dropped. With healthy love, you are not rehearsing conversations in your head. You are not wondering if you asked for too much or said something the wrong way. Your thoughts slow down because there is nothing to manage. Silence stops feeling dangerous. It becomes spacious, comfortable, a place where connection still exists even when no one is speaking. And for someone like you, that silence can feel unfamiliar at first. You've learned to associate closeness with effort, with engagement, with constant emotional motion. So when calm shows up, your mind might question it. Is this real or am I missing something? But your body knows. Your breath deepens. Your sleep improves. Your appetite returns to normal rhythms. Your laughter comes without tension. Healthy love supports you even on days when you have nothing to give. You are not punished for being tired. You are not subtly distanced for having emotions. You are met where you are without explanation. You don't have to teach emotional basics. You don't have to translate your inner world into smaller pieces. You don't have to earn reliability by being easy or agreeable. Consistency is simply there, not as a reward, not as a performance, but as a baseline. And perhaps the most healing part for you, Aquarius, is that you are no longer defining yourself through how well you can hold someone else. You get to exist, fully, without editing. Your ideas are received, not tolerated. Your emotions are welcome, not managed. Your independence is respected, not threatened. This kind of love does not rush you. It doesn't push timelines. It doesn't need dramatic proof. It trusts its own steadiness. And that trust invites something new to unfold inside you. You begin to notice how much energy you once spent just staying connected. How much brilliance was tied up in maintaining emotional balance for two. With that energy returned to you, your creativity wakes up. Your curiosity expands. Your sense of self feels more spacious. You are not performing love anymore. You are participating in it. There may be moments when this ease feels almost too quiet. When your system, once accustomed to intensity, looks for stimulation. That doesn't mean something is missing. It means your nervous system is recalibrating to safety. Can you imagine choosing connection that feels like rest instead of work? That question is not hypothetical anymore. It's an invitation. Because the love aligned with you does not demand that you shrink. It does not compete with your growth. It walks beside it. And as you sit with this possibility, something important is happening beneath the surface. Your standards are changing, not from fear, but from clarity. What comes next is not louder, it is truer. And once you recognize this feeling, you will never mistake effort for intimacy again. Stay close. There is still more light ahead. Aquarius, notice how this moment feels different. Not louder, not urgent, but steady, as if something inside you has quietly taken its rightful place. There comes a point in life when the question changes. You stop asking how much more you can give and start asking where your energy truly belongs. That shift doesn't arrive dramatically. It arrives honestly. At this stage of your life, you're not here to demonstrate devotion anymore. You've already lived that truth. You've shown patience, loyalty, depth. You've stayed when it would have been easier to leave. You've loved with integrity. Now, something subtler is guiding you. Alignment? Not the kind that looks impressive from the outside, but the kind that feels right in your body when no one else is watching. You begin to sense when connection flows both ways. When care is shared, not managed. When responsibility moves naturally between two people instead of settling quietly on your shoulders. This chapter isn't asking you to become less generous. It's asking you to become more discerning. You are noticing how love either nourishes your growth or quietly pulls your attention away from it. How some dynamics energize your vision, while others keep you circling old patterns. And that awareness feels new because for a long time, chaos was familiar. Intensity once felt like closeness. Uncertainty felt like chemistry. Emotional highs and lows felt like proof that something mattered. So when peace begins to appear, your system may not recognize it right away. It can feel flat, uneventful, almost boring. But that boredom is not emptiness. It's spaciousness. It's what happens when your nervous system is no longer bracing for impact. When your mind doesn't need to stay alert for emotional shifts or unspoken tension. Healing rarely announces itself with excitement. It shows up as neutrality. As quiet mornings. As evenings where nothing needs fixing. For someone like you, who has always lived a few steps ahead, this stillness can feel unfamiliar. You may catch yourself wondering if you're losing passion when in truth, you're gaining presence. This shift is happening now because your soul is done rehearsing old lessons. You've extracted the wisdom. You've integrated the insight. There is nothing left to prove. What you are stepping into requires less effort and more honesty. It asks you to choose relationships that support your evolution instead of distracting you from it. Connections that respect your independence without requiring emotional distance. And perhaps most importantly, it asks you to trust that ease does not mean lack of depth. Can you allow love to feel calm without questioning its validity? Can you let reciprocity replace endurance without guilt? These are not abstract questions anymore. They are lived ones, answered slowly through experience. As this stage unfolds, you may find yourself releasing identities that were built around being the strong one, the understanding one, the one who holds it all together. You are allowed to be supported now. You are allowed to receive without explaining why. This is not a retreat from love. It is a return to yourself. And as unfamiliar as this terrain may feel, there is something deeply reassuring about it. Like standing on solid ground after years of learning how to swim in unpredictable waters. Stay with this feeling. Let it orient you. Because the clarity forming here is preparing you for a connection that meets you without resistance. And when that arrives, you'll recognize it not by intensity, but by how little of yourself you have to leave behind. Aquarius, stay here with me for a moment longer. Not to conclude anything, not to summarize, just to let the meaning of this journey settle gently into your chest. There is a quiet dignity in realizing you never needed to be corrected, only understood, only met. So much of your life has been shaped by learning how to carry yourself in spaces that could not fully hold you. You adapted. You refined. You became thoughtful with your words, careful with your needs, selective with your vulnerability. Not because your heart was excessive, but because it was precious. You have always known how to love deeply without losing your intelligence. How to care expansively without needing to possess. That balance, that rare blend of mind and heart is not common. And yet, for a long time, you wondered if it was a flaw. What if the tenderness you carry was never meant to be negotiated? What if it was meant to be recognized by someone who could stand in its presence without asking you to soften it? The right connection does not require you to dim your curiosity, your emotional fluency, or your vision for the future. It does not feel threatened by your independence or overwhelmed by your depth. It feels steady. It feels spacious. It feels like being welcomed home without having to explain where you have been. When that love arrives, and you will notice how little effort it takes to remain yourself. How natural it feels to speak honestly. How safe it is to rest without bracing for disappointment. You will recognize it not by intensity, but by coherence. Your thoughts, emotions, and body will finally be in agreement. And in that alignment, a beautiful realization will surface. Nothing was ever wrong with your heart. It was not broken. It was not naive. It was simply early. Early for the kind of reciprocity it was designed to receive. Some hearts are built ahead of their time. They love with tomorrow's understanding in today's world. That does not make them misplaced. It makes them rare. Take a breath now. Slowly, let it move all the way through you. Notice how this truth does not rush you. It does not demand immediate change. It does not push you toward anything. It simply stands beside you and says you are allowed to arrive exactly as you are. You are not behind. You are not catching up. You are not recovering from a mistake. You are integrating wisdom that could only be earned through lived experience. And as you step forward from here, you do so with clarity instead of doubt, with discernment instead of defense, with openness that no longer abandons itself. There is a softness available to you now that is rooted in strength, a gentleness that knows its boundaries, a love that no longer confuses endurance with devotion. If your heart could speak to you in this moment, what would it thank you for surviving? What would it ask you to trust next? You don't need to answer that yet. Just let the question stay with you. Let it walk beside you as you return to your life. Aquarius, you were never too much. You were loving with integrity in a world still learning how to meet it. And now, you are exactly where you need to be. Aquarius, before you go, let me leave you with something gentle and a little unexpected. Healing doesn't always feel like a breakthrough. Sometimes it feels like a recognition. Like hearing your own truth spoken out loud for the first time without resistance. If something in this message stayed with you, if a sentence settled quietly in your chest instead of rushing through your mind, that's not coincidence. That's alignment finding you. You didn't arrive here by accident. This space called to the part of you that is done doubting its own depth. The part that no longer needs permission to want more honesty, more reciprocity, more peace. And maybe this is the moment you notice how far you've already come. Not by force, not by proving anything, but by choosing yourself again and again even when it was uncomfortable. There is nothing you need to fix tonight, nothing you need to chase. Just something you can allow. Allow your standards to remain intact. Allow your heart to stay open without overextending. Allow trust to grow slowly, starting with yourself. If this resonated, let your voice be part of the space we're building here. Leave a comment. Not for me, but for the other Aquarius who needs to know they're not alone in this season. And if you feel called to stay connected, to keep receiving messages like this that speak to your growth rather than your fear, subscribe and walk this journey with us. This channel isn't about predictions, it's about presence. Take this moment as a blessing. May the connections entering your life now meet you without asking you to shrink. May your peace deepen without apology. May your future feel less urgent and more true. Trust yourself. You've been learning how all along, and stay close. There is another message coming. One that speaks to what opens next when you finally stop settling and start aligning. Until then, be gentle with your heart. It knows the way.